style of law. Graciously volunteered their time to be available to the general public for free calls. The basic purpose of the program is just basically to provide a public service which we hope will be helpful to callers and maybe educational more generally to the general public as to maybe how lawyers work and give people a sense of how they respond to legal questions, even though we wouldn't pretend to give detailed legal advice like a normal lawyer would after further full investigation of the facts and the law. The toll-free number, I'm saying toll-free number, the free number to call eventually will be 542-6228, and that should be on the screen here at some point shortly. Before we start taking any calls, I would issue a couple of standard disclaimers. Obviously, we're not purporting to guarantee the accuracy of any of the brief advice that any of us would give this evening. We really wouldn't conceive of it maybe as legal advice as such like you would ordinarily get after a full consultation. And typically I think all of us would be aware of the fact that sometimes it takes several consultations before all the facts are available to an attorney and he can conduct full research into the law to give a detailed answer. So we won't be able to do that this evening, but we have had some success, I think, in our past programs in giving people at least some preliminary guidelines. The other thing I guess I'd mention briefly as to the type of questions, we've tried to have a balance to some extent in the people who've been on our panels, and obviously we're focusing kind of on what you'd call human interest sorts of problems, and so we don't typically expect questions on antitrust or corporate tax or things of that sort. But if you have a problem of some kind and you think it might be a legal problem, you can feel free to give us a call. Now's your chance. The number, I see it's not quite on the screen yet. Maybe somebody, there we go, it should be 542-6228. Let me introduce, did I introduce people here? I did not, did I? We have, number one, Lisa Swanson, who is currently in Missoula and on her way to a practice in Helena, but just before she leaves town, she's agreed to appear on the panel. We have next across the table and to my left, George DeVoe, who is also a practitioner in Missoula. And then finally, our third panelist is Ron Bender, who is with the firm of Warden, Thane and Haynes here in Missoula. And again, we appreciate their being here and taking time to be on the show as a public service. We hope the phones are all set to go. Sometimes it takes a minute to get patched through, and our secretary, Linda Marr, will be screening your calls. She's the one who came up, I think, at least tied for first with thinking of the name of the show of Thou a Lawyer. And we have on our crew, we have Gene Bernofsky, who is the executive producer, who's doing this free of charge as one of the, I guess he's one of the board members of the MCAT board. And let's see, we got a Mr. Lamb, who's one of the head cameramen. We have Gene's son, who's here tonight, who I hardly recognize anymore, who's my son's age, Sam Bernofsky. And then I think backstage is Mike Fellows. I think he's still around, who's one of the directors of the program. Well, we're still waiting for our first phone call. Usually we've had one by now.
Well, it might be a little slow tonight. We don't know.
That's right. We've been off the air for 2 months.
No one has any legal problems.
I guess that's great.
I think I'd like to take the opportunity to thank MCAT for providing the opportunity for the bar to participate and hopefully answer some questions from the public and be able to establish a little bit in terms of what lawyers do or don't do, and hopefully answer some questions of a general nature.
In the past, I know I've got topics in front of me that we've discussed, how lawyers work and you know, maybe their initial consultation fees typically, and how to find lawyers, lawyer referral or yellow pages or things like that, and how small claims court works. We've dealt with some of the most common questions that have arisen in people's practice. For instance, in the areas of bankruptcy law, when we had someone on the panel who was an expert on that. We spent 5 or 10 minutes, so I kind of am hesitant to rehash old ground that we've already covered. Lisa Swanson had suggested a potential topic that might generate some calls. It would kind of be, it would risk departing from our normal format, which is to kind of respond to very specific calls, just one thing after another in any given topic. She was thinking that perhaps we might have as a general topic on which listeners could call in and express views, presumably, which is again different from our normal format, but some discussion on the general topic of the war on drugs, which of course has significant legal implications, and legal implications are, I suppose, just one aspect of the larger policy issue. So I guess if we're really desperate, you know, we can take calls from people who want to express their views on that overriding issue, and while we're waiting, we can maybe start with Lisa with her views on that topic while we're waiting for regular calls. Do you have any views one way or the other? You got any strong? Yeah, I didn't ask you what your view was. I thought I might know what it was, but I'm not sure.
Well, I guess I really respect our Surgeon General, Jocelyn Elders, and her statement that we should look at legalizing drugs. And there's 150 reasons why. I guess I'd like a direct question as to why.
Well, okay. Let me lead up to a question by making a brief statement on it myself. I used to be a prosecutor back east in Philadelphia, where obviously there was a huge caseload of drug cases, just such as you would expect there to be in any large metropolitan area today. And in fact, they used to run a drug court night and day, 24 hours a day, nothing but drug cases. And it was a major operation. And in fact, the minor drug cases that out here would be treated as a big deal, out there were dismissed out at what they called the roundhouse, which was the central police station, pursuant to certain guidelines that we had. And so there was a little more, I think, necessarily relaxed attitude towards minor drug problems. But when I was in the DA's office, there were a couple of people who I considered among the more intelligent people in the office, thoughtful people, who did believe that it was a losing battle to try to win the war on drugs, and that the costs were greater than the gains. And I've resisted that, I guess, for quite some time, because it just, you know, all the normal reasons that people have for resisting that. But I guess having seen it from the defense perspective in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, and I'm thinking of a case, for instance, where we went up, there were 13 co-defendants in a major drug sale ring, and therefore 13 attorneys were appointed to represent these 13 co-defendants. And so the government paid our way, because we're all court appointed, to make a big trip up to do an interview of one of the government witnesses. And that took over 10 hours, I know. When I remember my billable hours. That was just travel time and so on. And so that was I kept thinking during that, but the government's paying big, big, big bucks to do all this.
But the government has a cap, and they usually stick to that cap of $3,500 per case, no matter if you bill up $15,000 or $17,000. Or I've had several of my bills cut to $3,500. So they're spending a ton of money, but it's not on public defenders, is my only point. The majority of the money is going to prosecutors. They don't get their fees cut. It's just the public defenders that get their fees cut. They're dumping billions of dollars into prisons and building more and more prisons, and they're filling them as fast as they can build them.
Well, that's been a politically tough question, I think, because on both sides there's arguments one way or the other. The only thing that I know is that there's been a lot of effort into it, both on the government side in terms of money, and manpower, and devotion to it. There's been a lot of problems on the other side, just the cost to society in terms of what the drug problem has done. And realistically, it's a tough political issue. And I guess for me, usually being trying to stay away from political issues, that's the legislature, and who's going to be able to convince Congress or the state legislatures one way or the other. I think in Montana we have a whole different outlook just from our culture or background out here in terms of drugs. I mean, there seems to be a lot of effort or feeling one way or the other on both sides from somewhere else, but it is a real problem in terms of the waste to society, the cost, plus the cost on the prosecutor and the defense. And the only thing that I know is that the government it's a high priority. They're spending a lot of money, and if people are involved in that, there's serious penalties out there, and everybody's starting to re-question that again. And of course, all the other arguments that there's other, quote, legal drugs out there now, tobacco and alcohol, and going back to the old days of prohibition, that you can't legislate against morals. I mean, those are all kind of legal questions and issues, but realistically, I think it gets down to what are the elected officials going to do on it and what their output is. From my viewpoint, I don't practice very much criminal law, but I think it's one of those things that you have to live with unless the groups get out there and really put the political pressure on one way or the other. It's a tough decision.
I think the legal system in general is pretty much bound to follow whatever is enacted by the legislatures. And the backup in the court system, by and large, is a result of being mandated to follow those requirements.
I think that those comments that you just made are, I think, important to stress to the general public. The general public, I think, sometimes tends to blame lawyers and judges for problems in areas where all we're doing is administering the laws that politicians who may or may not be lawyers have passed. And still at the same time, it strikes me that some lawyers who have had experience in dealing with these cases, I guess, could offer some insights, but I have a suspicion that we could stir up a hornet's nest without really solving any big problems tonight for people. And so we do encourage, again, you to have your calls between now and 8 o'clock. They're free of charge, of course. That's the beauty of it, at least. You may not get accurate advice, but you'll get free advice, at least. And the number is 542-6228.
Milt Friedman, I had him for in college years ago, 10 years ago, for some economics, a couple different economics classes, and he's a pretty famous economist. I know most people have heard of him at least, and he wrote a book called Liberty and Drugs, and he talks about prohibition, what the effects of prohibition were on the consumption of alcohol, and he's got the statistics. And he also relates in his book that the amount of alcohol that was consumed before Prohibition, during Prohibition, and after Prohibition, and along those lines, the crime rate before, during, and after. And during Prohibition, the crime rate soared. And when they legalized alcohol, there was a drastic decline in the crime rate. And a lot of people, and the same thing happened with the war on drugs. When the Reagan administration took over, they turned up the speed and the volume on the drug war, and the crime rate soared along with, the new legislation and the new laws. And so we've got crime rate is at an all-time high, and it's just getting higher, and they keep pumping more and more money in, and it's not helping. It's not going down. And so Milt Friedman's theory is that if you legalize this and control it and market it, you'll take the wind out of the sails of organized crime, and other countries are having real success with this. Italy and Spain have just abolished penalties for personal use for any drug used for their own consumption, and they're having real good luck with that. They have needle exchange programs, which gets the AIDS virus under control. You're not spreading that. And they've got these new coffee houses where people can go to a safe place and get off the streets. They can get a meal, they can get a bed, and their crime rate is declining by leaps and bounds. They're having real effects. And a lot of people say, well, if you legalize drugs, then there'll be more drug users. And that's not necessarily true. Prohibition showed that when they legalized alcohol, look at the people. People generally want the least harmful substance for the best effect. People are going from whiskey to beer to light beer, you know, and from hard cigarettes to light cigarettes to super filters to just
Do
people.
you think that the public advertising that goes on about that, I mean, there's been a lot of public advertising on television about cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption. I think that sort of an approach probably would work better than the prohibition sort of approach.
Education.
For the long-term
Definitely, education is the key.
use.
You get back to the basic issue, though, in terms of, you know, how far should society as a whole impose its standards and morals on the individual versus the free choice. And
Yeah.
those are tough issues, and tough questions on both sides. I mean, on the other side, there is the fact that it is harmful.
It-
I mean,
People
so
should
is
be allowed to
alcohol and
harm
tobacco.
themselves. It's their choice. They
That's
should be
true,
allowed.
but should society be required to foot the cost for
No,
it?
the individual should pay the consequences of their actions when they screw up. If the guy goes out and drinks and runs someone over, he should suffer the consequences. He shouldn't be able to say, I was drunk, you know, and pay the price.
I do think, though, that legalizing it may take some of the profit motive out of. And
Definitely.
may definitely affect the violence that's associated with that.
Looks like we have our... Is that ready to go on yet, or is it? Not really?
Line one.
Line one, I think you're on the air.
Yeah, I need to ask a question regarding judges.
Okay, well, we know a little bit about judges, but we're not about to give you advice on which ones we think are best or not, but go ahead.
Okay, how do they make their decisions when they sentence a person to a prison? There's a case I'm thinking of right offhand, and it's the one of the man who wrote threatening and intimidating letters to an abortion doctor.
Yes.
And he was sentenced to prison, and in the Missoulian it stated that one of the reasons was that the judge was upset with his attitude. And then in the very same week, he sentenced a man who killed a woman while under the influence of alcohol. He killed her with his car. He gives him probation. Well, what I don't understand is what's the logic in the two different things, is that you can put a man in prison for what he writes to you, or writes to a person in threatening them, and yet you can give a man probation who took the life of a human being. That's what I don't understand.
Well, I won't try to... Anybody else want to tackle that one offhand, or familiar with the facts of the case at all?
I'm familiar with the case. I watched part of that trial, and
Well, you know, if you stop and think about it, but in my mind, I told my wife, I said what the man shouldn't have done, he shouldn't have wrote her letters, he should have just got drunk and ran over her with his car. Because then he would have got probation, you know, but he got sent to prison. And the man who killed the woman got probation.
Well, I think you're talking, though, there's a little difference between purposeful homicide, which you're kind of assuming in your hypothetical, and a negligent homicide, which frequently, in Montana, it's a misdemeanor, by the way. It's not even a felony.
Are you kidding?
That's true.
To
It's
kill
a
somebody with
misdemeanor.
your car while you're drunk?
That's it. It's a misdemeanor. And the reason being is that sometimes we just make minor mistakes. You have a set of 2 beers, you had 2.5 beers, and so you weren't in 100% control of your powers. Didn't mean to hurt anybody, but you did. You killed somebody. In fact, people sometimes kill people without even being drunk. You're just talking about negligent actions, not willfully wrong actions. And so therefore, the legislature, in its wisdom, distinguishes in its criminal code between mere negligent faults and those acts that are done willfully. Now, most judges start from the maximum penalty that's authorized by the statute and then try and place each individual case on some kind of a continuum, within that range. And they'll also consider the not only the nature of the offense, how serious it is within that category, but also the prior background of the defendant, if they have prior criminal record and things like that. And it's hard to be very precise about sentencing. There are numerous efforts that have been made at the federal level and in many states to set up what are called sentencing guidelines. And they have an interesting history, and we could spend a whole hour, I suppose, talking about sentencing guidelines, because I know Lisa and I at least have had a lot of experience dealing with those at the federal level, and I think at least maybe Ron has had at least one case at the federal level.
Would it be fair to say that they went from a totally discretionary standard to a fixed standard that applies to everybody across the board? And I think historically, since they've done that, have taken away some of the discretion from the judges, that there's been a lot of problems and considerations that it should go back to the old system.
Yeah, it's been a very, very difficult thing, and individual federal judges have resigned rather than follow the federally mandated sentencing guidelines. Basically what they've tried to do is just set up kind of a grid, a chart, and on one level they would say, well, under this type of offense, we're going to say that there are 7 or 8 different kinds of gradations of seriousness of this type of offense. And then on the other level, we're going to say that this person has so many priors or whatever it may be, and then we'll plunk him into some one of those grids that are resultant from that kind of a chart and just play a numbers game, rather mindlessly, some would say, without considering anything else. And there are pros and cons of that. I know that myself, I was initially a supporter of that concept in general, but the way it's worked out at the federal level has been, I think, an occasional severe disappointment, to say the least.
And the other thing to consider is that these acts and these crimes are not always black and white. I mean, what you read in the newspaper in terms of what happened, it's pretty clear in black and white, and everybody knows who's the good guy and the bad guy. You go sit through a trial and hear all the testimony, and usually the ones that get tried are the ones that there are disputed facts about, and it's not easy to make a decision, i.e., did he intentionally kill this person? Did he negligently kill him? And if you sit through a whole trial, and sometimes that's a difficult decision to make. It's not real easy, like when it comes out in the newspaper, that it's black and white. And that same follows through with the judge. He sat through and heard all the evidence and know what's going on, and he has a lot more information in terms of the probation report, the background, the actual facts of the case, and that all enters into it, rather than someone who just reads a one-paragraph line as to what happened in the newspaper and is judging whether that's good or bad.
Yeah, I think the newspaper puts in there what's juicy.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I thank you for your time, and I'll get off here.
Well, that's all right. Thanks for your call.
Bet. Bye.
Yeah, I think that it is. I like your comment on the situation of judges who frequently get a case that they've dealt with over many weeks, and after hearing a great deal of information, and then it gets summarized perhaps erroneously in the newspaper, and then they get tagged with making an erroneous decision one way or the other. And
Don't judges, though, sometimes look at the particular defendant? The caller had a question about the judge taking the defendant's attitude into consideration, but I think that the judges do look at, is this defendant repentant about what he did or may have done, and considering the sentence.
you know, there are stated goals of each sentence, and I found it a useful exercise in my own practice at the stage of sentencing to ask what purpose would be served by a given type of sentence or not served. And so you look at the classic rationales for sentencing. One of those is rehabilitation. And if a person is repentant and sorry for what they did, then criminologists will tell us that their chances of being rehabilitated, as it were, are improved. Whereas if they're unrepentant and are basically saying, oh, the hell with you, then they're likely to get a more severe sanction.
They get the more punishment purpose of it.
I see 2 lines lit up, but I don't have a cue card yet as to which line I ought to punch first. Line 1 or line 2? Any idea? Either one? Usually I got to do it in a certain sequence. Line 1, you're on the air. Or you were. Cut them off. Well, we'll try line 2 here. Oh, line 1, you're on the air.
Yes. I have a question. I'm calling from Mineral County. And if I were to call my county sheriff and say, Mickey, if I gave you, say, $50 a year to buy a license to grow a single house plant, would he be able to say yes?
You mean marijuana? Is that what he's talking
What kind of house plant are you talking about?
This is marijuana.
Well, Lisa, you want to take that one?
Could you repeat the question? If you gave $50 to the sheriff and said, could I grow a marijuana plant?
Yes, if I, bought a license, so he would know who in the county has a plant, and the money could be put in toward the new courthouse, or into a special fund. That way, I'm not engaged in buying or selling.
Why would you want to grow a marijuana plant?
For personal use.
For personal use? For medical use?
I suppose one could say that. You could. There's could have an argument for that, but I don't have any legitimate medical use.
You don't have glaucoma or cancer or anything like that?
No.
I don't think, there's no sheriff that has the authority to give you permission to grow a marijuana plant for any amount of money.
Oh, I see. Because this is a state law or a national law or a
Federal law.
federal law.
Federal law and a state law.
Oh, I see. So he would be powerless then to say yay or nay on that. He can only say nay on this.
He'd better say nay. There are ways that people can have marijuana for personal use. I don't know if they can grow their own. I am aware that they can get it through a government operation where they grow marijuana just for medical use. There's about 9 people in the country, in the United States right now, who went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they do have permission to use marijuana for medical use.
My lady has asthma, and she believes that it does help. So we would have to talk to a doctor, and then to buy it through a doctor or a pharmacy or something.
To call Lisa and get advice from her on how to do it.
I'd
I would
have
get
to
the
check,
advice of a
yeah.
good lawyer on
Yeah,
that before I did it.
I've never had anybody ask me to get them medical. I've never had anyone. I would have to do some research and get back to you. You could call me back.
But my guess is that the requirements and the registration and the paperwork to get all that is pretty tough.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for calling.
And thanks for calling. I'm seeing, line 2 still up. Anybody there? Line 2? Anybody there? Nope.
I'd like to make one comment about the other caller in terms of the judges and the sentencing. I mean, the other concern that I see about all that is the only cases that get reported are in the very minority, and they're usually the high volatile ones. If you sat down and looked on a day-to-day basis of every person who was convicted and the sentence imposed, I think by and by, in a large majority, if you were aware of those facts and sat through all that, you'd say that that sentence is fair. I mean, because I don't know what the criminal filings are, but there's probably at least 5 or 6 criminal cases filed a day in Missoula County. Would that be your guess?
Or at least.
And the newspaper, probably in a whole year, would pick up only maybe 10 of them. And they're the ones where there probably is a bad bounce from some viewpoint. It's a little awkward, and they're playing it up realistically. But the run-of-the-mill cases, in my experience, in terms of juries finding people guilty and the sentences that have been imposed, and 95% of the time, if you ask people whether that was fair or the punishment meets the crime or whatever that term is, they would probably all say, well, yes, that's pretty fair.
That case that he was talking about where the man was sentenced for writing letters to the doctor in Bozeman, I believe that's the case he was speaking of. I think that a lot of people are appalled, and probably rightly so, because it's a fine line between free speech and where do we draw the line. Your thoughts shouldn't be controlled. Your actions, yes, but
Well, the Supreme Court drew a line on that here recently.
what would you like to tell us about that?
Wasn't there an article in the paper just recently about the Supreme Court said that the
Abortion.
protesters would fall under the RICO statutes?
Which is the Racketeering
Yes.
Influence Corrupt Organization
Right,
Act.
right. But those are protesters out there, and some of those people have been bombing dwellings and bombing clinics. This man wrote letters from his house. Letters. That was it. There was no picketing. There was no attempts to bomb. There's no... What he wrote were words that got him into trouble, and that's what people are frightened about, is that when you have your words monitored to that extent, where you can be punished in a court of law and sent to prison for what you write.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I imagine it'll be up on appeal. Is it being appealed?
It
you know?
is. I believe the lawyer, Craig Shannon, I talked to him after the trial. He was the lawyer representing the man, and I'm almost 100% certain that he was appealing that to the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
That should be an interesting issue in the Supreme Court in terms of, I'm sure there'll be some hot debate over that up there.
Mhm. I wonder if we could turn to another topic. I'm not sure how relevant this is to the law and lawyers, but it's related to what we've been talking about. That's a larger issue, even beyond the war on drugs, but just the war on crime. Can we talk about that? There's been this new legislation introduced by President Clinton. There's been this uproar all over the country. In California, they got this 3 strikes you're out legislation. And maybe I tend to project my own feelings. I've just seen an awful lot of emphasis on recent TV shows. Just that, boy, we're sick of it, and we're not going to take it anymore, and we don't care what we do to you people. We're going to throw you away, and to hell with it. Any trigger any additional thoughts with that kind of a general introduction? What do you think about our new war on crime? What do you think about this effort to get tough on crime?
Well, some of the issues I agree with, and I wish you would list them for me right now. I remember reading it in the paper. What was the package? What did the
Well,
public
they're
would probably
increasing
like
the
to know?
prisons, of course. And they're
Increasing the
increasing the
prisons.
number of police. And they're increasing all the number of offenses that you can get the death penalty for. Just generally trying to look as tough as they possibly can.
There was something to do with, I think, school grounds, or having drugs near school grounds. was
No
getting
doubt.
Stricter. And oh, I remember gun-free school zones. I think that's great. I
Mhm.
think that our children deserve to be safe, and I feel so sorry for children in inner city schools who, if they don't have the money to go to a private school, they basically risk their life every day going
We'll
to school.
take a call right away if it's ready. Will it pick up if I push it right now, maybe? We'll try it. No, not yet. Oh, wait a minute.
Have to wait for the high sign here.
Yeah, usually there's somebody who gives me a big fat sign and says, okay, is it ready? Not yet.
This man right here will give you the sign.
Not yet. Well, anyway, we're talking about crime and the problems of...
So the zone around the schools, the anti-weapon zone, I think is
I think there is.
fantastic legislation.
And I think there is a big social uprising against the more random violence sort of crimes.
Exactly. The bumping the
Drive-by
cars.
shooting, those sorts of things that are...
I know a recent cover of Time had an article on children who are growing up nowadays in the shadow of fear. And I don't think we've seen much of that here in little old Missoula, Montana, although I went to a school meeting or whatever it was just a couple nights ago where there was talk about guns in schools, knives in schools,
Yeah.
violence
Very
in schools that they hadn't seen before.
They say Missoula is on the verge of an explosion with the population growing, and the police force here are real nervous about gangs and guns. And there was two. I took my daughter back to school yesterday after the orthodontist appointment. I dropped her off, and there was 2 cop cars at the school up at Rattlesnake. And when she got home from school, I asked her what it was, and some children were smoking marijuana in the playground, 7th graders. So, and that's not the first incident. That's about the 3rd that I've heard of this year.
Oh, this year.
Yeah, this year. So there's drugs in our schools, and back to legalizing drugs, I still don't think that would be a problem with school children because it's always been illegal for minors to drink or use drugs or whatever, and there's always ways that they get it, whether it's legal or not. If it's around, there's a way to get it. It's just a matter of educating these kids, getting them young, showing them the harm and the effects and what a dead-end road it is.
Yeah, I've sure seen lots of clients for whom it was the biggest dead-end road you could ever possibly imagine, especially in regard to certain addictive kinds of drugs. I know when I was a prosecutor back east in Philadelphia, it was kind of no big thing, or it was viewed that cocaine was not that big a thing. But now I had a client here several years ago where I was able to do a lot of research with local drug counselors about cocaine specifically, and apparently it is highly, highly addictive, just horribly addictive. And this we didn't know 5, 10 years ago. And now we know these things. There's things that I know from dealing with cases about methamphetamines is another example. I've read a lot of literature on the pharmacological and psychological and medical consequences of meth, and in none of that literature as of 3 years ago was there anything about what I now believe to be true from doing this just research with ordinary individuals, that it has a problem with people not having a recognition of reality. There's a prosecutor in Helena who gave the most dramatic example was they showed a woman who was charged with possession and use and sale of meth, a film of her being in possession of the meth. She still persisted in denying that she was in possession of the meth, even though they had a film of her. Now that sounds almost unbelievable, except that when you deal with these people that have had these kind of problems. The other thing I'm thinking of in terms of waste, I'm thinking of some individuals who are charged with sale of all different kinds of drugs, not heroin, but cocaine, meth, marijuana, and so on. And these young men were making a living this way because they couldn't do it some other way, presumably more productively. I don't think that these young kids ought to be doing that, and nothing in the drug war is going to stop that. In other words, the more successful we are in prosecuting it, that will, of course, just drive the price up, and then somebody else is going to have a huge incentive to do
Well,
it.
it gets back to the profit motive that's tied up in it, and I think that is directly tied to whether or not it's legal to do so. The minute it becomes legal, the profit motive will be, by and large, gone.
Yeah, I wonder almost if there isn't a certain psychological thrill in doing something that's illegal. It adds to the...
Probably particularly with younger people.
Sure.
I would agree
And the
with
people
that.
who are first doing it, it's got a certain glamour, perhaps. But I don't know. I mean, as I say, as I've thought about it over the years, it's been something where I've been reluctant to think about absolute legalization. I understand some countries like Belgium and the Netherlands have done something not quite that far, but something sort of in between. But,
Do you know of any statistics from those countries about whether or not drug use overall went up or down after it was legalized?
I don't really.
Well, I don't know right offhand, but I know after reading Milt Friedman's book that those countries, it has gone down. They have had good results. I don't know what the statistics are. I know that it has gone down. One argument that I hear people say, and this is probably one of the most heinous reasons that people bring up for not legalizing drugs, is that what about the mother who's pregnant and what, she's got a baby inside of her and she's doing drugs, she's using crack.
She's doing that now.
Yes, and the argument for legalization is that even a mother who's addicted to drugs loves and cares about her child. She's a junkie or an addict, but she does care about that baby, but she is not going to go in and get prenatal care if she's going to make herself a felon. She's just not going to do it. She's going to sit at home and she's going to hide because she's going to be afraid to go in, because she knows if she goes in for prenatal care for her child that she's busted. And if she wasn't made out to be a criminal, she would seek medical care. They would be able to reach those mothers and talk to them and reach them somehow. We're not reaching them right now. We're getting babies born, not in Montana, but in big cities. Every day in New York, there's hundreds of crack babies. And these mothers have to be reached, and the only way to reach them is to make it safe for them to go in and get medical care and get counseling.
Well, there's a lot of social, economic issues out there and reasons, and it's a highly emotional issue. Do you think that some of our elected representatives will, I mean, that's where it's going to come one way or the other. They're either going to say yes or no. Do you think that in today's culture and society that...
I think our Surgeon General is a rock amongst the pebbles. I mean, she is so strong to stand up to the administration, and they all just shunned her, and she opened her mouth.
She's taken a lot of flack over that.
And she's got a lot of courage, and I sure admire her, because she's seeing what the war on drugs is doing to minorities and people of lower income levels, and that's who it's really hurting.
Tough decisions and tough issues.
But no, I don't think the administration is ready for it. I don't think we'll see it in the next 10 or 20 years. I don't see a big change. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think the same thing. I think typically, assuming it is a good idea or something along those lines is a good idea, people who have studied the nature of social change will tell you that what typically happens is that once you get to a certain critical mass in changing people's views, and again, I'm just assume it's a good idea for sake of argument, and I don't know for sure, I think it may be, that what happens is from a minor percentage of people like Jocelyn Elders believing this, maybe 5–10%, when it starts sweeping up towards 20%, then it's an idea whose time is about to come, and the future change will sort of be inevitable. Now, it sounds kind of odd because it's still only 20%, but again, there are professors who study the nature of social change will tell you that typically that's where it occurs right then, is that from that point on it gains that kind of momentum and suddenly becomes an idea that's unstoppable. But I think that is a long way off. There's just so much hostility towards drugs, and justifiably so, given the way that they are having a horrible impact on our society for whatever reason.
The financial incentive to deal in drugs is just so tempting. And I mean, it costs, the statistics are similar. These figures may not be exactly right. $1,000 to buy a kilo of cocaine from Colombia. By the time that same kilo is cut and hits the street, it's worth, I think it was like $500,000 or $600,000 in profit from 1,000. No, it was 366,000. 1,000 to 366,000. So you pay the Colombians $1,000 for the kilo. You bring it over. You sell it for $360,000, and so there's your profit.
Yeah. So the point is that if we do all these big excursions in foreign countries and try and wipe out the fields in Colombia, they'll just go on and do it in Peru or Yugoslavia or Israel or umpteen zillion other countries. It's just going to be utterly pointless. There's always going to be somebody who will have the incentive to go ahead and try and supply these drugs, either in terms of the foreign countries or the local yokels who got no future otherwise.
We have farmers
in our
here.
country.
Yeah, we have farmers here in the United States who who have gone belly up 10 years ago, and there's nothing they like better than to, I'm not suggesting that they all want to grow marijuana, but there sure would be a profit in it for them. And
Some of the
We still have a call. I'm not sure what's
But they
happening.
should realize, though, that the law prohibits that, and the full force of the government and the elected officials and the police effort is there. And regardless of whether it's wrong or right, you're violating the law,
Right.
and the penalty is substantial.
right,
And in terms of the effort that's going on out there,
right.
I mean...
I'm not suggesting
I'm not
anybody,
either.
anybody grow marijuana.
I'm just saying the reality of it all is, you talk about all the risks and all the money and everything, but a lot of people do not get away with it, and they end up, and I think if you went back and asked them, they'd probably say,
wasn't worth it.
wasn't worth it.
Right. The only point in bringing up the economics wasn't to tempt anybody out there. It was to just show that the underground market is just people doing this kind of thing are profiting when we, as a nation, our country, could be profiting. We could be using the money, taxing it, and we could be putting into schools and education and all kinds of things, getting welfare mothers daycare and helping them get off welfare, training them, and just, we could sure use the money. We're spending billions and billions of dollars every year on this war. And from an economic standpoint, I'm for legalization.
Well, we have one viewpoint here that's been stated on our panel, and we got 15 minutes left in our program. We're kind of having a slow night, I think, but maybe the general discussion that we're able to have this way is of some little interest. If someone on our crew can figure out when I need to push this button without my losing, I would appreciate, because we're losing our calls
We're
that do
getting
come
the
in.
calls. And we're seeing the calls.
They'll let me know. All right. Looks like that one got screened out. We don't take obscene phone calls, folks. No, I'm kidding. we don't screen out people very easily. We'll take almost any kind of
I
call.
can't wait to hear what the calls were from Linda.
That's all.
I can't wait to hear what the calls were.
All right.
The obscene calls from Linda.
Oh, usually we don't have any bad calls. Well, we've got 14 minutes or so left in which you're free to call. The number is 542-6228. We've been having a little discussion on the topic of the war on drugs from a legal and policy standpoint, and anyone who has some views on it is free to call. While we're waiting for a call, I'll merely reinforce what other panel members have just said, that unfortunately you see some young people who are, I do in my practice, confronted with the forces of the law who think that marijuana ought to be legal, but it's not yet, boys and girls. And so that's why people who are have positions of responsibility, and such as myself, I've never used marijuana. There's hardly anybody that I know in my generation that can say that. And there's only one reason. It's because it was illegal. And people who are Supreme Court nominees, I guess some guy from Harvard, didn't he have problems because he used it? Line one? Oh, okay, line one, you're on the air.
Hi there. I've been listening to you talking about legalizing drugs, and on the topic of legalizing marijuana in particular, I'd just like to point out that marijuana comes from a plant called the hemp plant, which has thousands of uses. It's gone back for thousands of years. It's probably the first plant cultivated by man. It's used for rope, for paper, for fiber. It can replace a lot of petrochemicals. It has a lot of uses, and I'd like to hear you, I guess, address that issue, that side of it.
I agree, and President Bush even flew a plane during the war that had hemp parts in it, holding it
The
together.
parachute that saved his life
Is that
when
right?
he was shot down had ropes that were made of hemp.
I didn't mean President Bush, but our past president. Yes, you're right. Hemp can save the planet.
Well, the only thing I'd like to say kind of against that is that marijuana may seem like one of the more harmless drugs, and certainly in some communities like Madison, Wisconsin, they've legalized it without any great harm occurring. On the other hand, there's two things to be said about marijuana that I would like to point out. One is that we think of it as just this little weed, but it's a compound of 410 elements, rather complex, and we don't know all the effects except that a study done, there's an NBC white paper. The single most significant effect that they've noticed amongst all kinds of people of all age groups is what they call the amotivational syndrome, i.e. kids that were A and B students suddenly become D and F students because they don't give a damn about their lives or anything else.
Well, that should be a matter of them taking responsibility for the way they conduct their own lives and not of the government telling them that they're not allowed to smoke this. As far as safety goes, marijuana has no known toxicity. There is, in all medical history, there is no record of anyone overdosing on marijuana.
Yeah, well, you may be right. I'm not disputing that that's not why maybe they shouldn't make it legal. I don't care if it's legal or not. All I know is I don't want my son using it and turning from a straight A student into a damn pothead, to put no fine point upon it.
Well, as a damn pothead myself, I would argue that if your son was responsible and if he lived his life responsibly, smoking pot would not turn him into some kind of burnout like you seem to be implying, or saying, I guess.
I've seen too many people, including people who are very close to me in my own family, have it happen to them, and so that's why I speak with some feeling on the matter. But thanks for your call. We'll take another one here, line 2. Line 2, you're on the air.
Hi. My question tonight deals with job security, and I would like to know if there's anything anyone can do about, like, seniority rights that have been violated on a job. Like, for example, if the owner's daughter wants a job there, and say I've been working there for 2 years, and my shift gets bumped down to half the hours, and he gives her the job. What can I do? What is my recourse legally?
Well, legally, in terms of the employment relation, it's basically at will with some just cause for termination, but there's no law out there that says the owner can't do that at this point in time, unless there's a collective bargaining agreement in effect, bargained across the table, or there's some illegal prohibited discrimination that's the basis for it. But just
So unless I work for a place that indeed is a unionized place, I don't have any rights then.
when you say unionized place, you're making an assumption there that I won't usually assume. If a union contract negotiates across the table with some terms and conditions in it that provide that, yes, but there are contracts out there that don't provide that either.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for your call. We're still free, I think, for another, how many, 5 minutes, am I right, or more? So feel free to call. The number, again, which may be on the screen, is 542-6228. And I think that your answer was exactly right, that that would be the limits of their rights in that situation. Looks like we have 7 more minutes, so we can take another call. I want to pick it up the minute I hear it, but it takes another little lag time. So just keep ringing, and we'll get you screened and through in a minute. And again, this is the Dial a Lawyer Talk Show. We'd like to thank, before we wrap up this evening, our panelists. One is Freddie. Okay, number 1, you're on the air, line 1.
Yes, back to the topic on legalizing drugs. Why is this such of a big topic? Is the public interest back in to marijuana, to narcotics? What seems to be the issue here?
Someone want to respond to that, or should I?
Well, I would think it's by and large the amount of money society is spending on this war in general, the money that could be spent on other things, and whether or not it's either a good use of those funds or whether or not it's being effective.
Okay. Prohibition didn't work, and should we legalize everything now? Crack, heroin? You know, that doesn't seem to be the right way to go. If we go down that avenue, I think crime will just be on the uprise, and you know, you won't be able to drug test the employees anymore, and a guy coming to work hired in a kite is probably more dangerous, I would think.
That's the argument, and we don't know what will happen if they legalize drugs. Prohibition showed that when they legalized alcohol, crime did go down, and people generally want to feel good and better and not worse. And most people generally use the least harmful substance.
And I don't know that the general argument is for legalizing some of the, quote, more dangerous drugs such as heroin or crack or...
Crack, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
That's fine.
I just wanted to say that crack wouldn't have been invented if drugs had been legal. The poor people who couldn't afford cocaine, invented crack cocaine because they couldn't afford to get the real thing. Crack cocaine is 10 times more dangerous, 10 times more harmful, and it screws up people's minds, and that's an understatement. So the point being that if drugs were legal, they'd be able to control the drug, the amount per dose, people would know what they were getting, you wouldn't have your drug overdoses, and drugs like crack would disappear. People do not want to take crack if they can get cocaine. And
But if we legalized marijuana, say, tomorrow, wouldn't the public say the interest would just skyrocket, you know? The people would start, no, it's legal, it's okay, it's fine. And now you're having students on it, and you don't know who your employer's working with some dangerous equipment at work tomorrow, you know, and you don't know, hey, you know, is he on it or is he, you know, clean? And that's the problem I'm looking at. I think everybody's, I don't even think it's a topic, you know, to write a new bill, you know, let's legalize marijuana. I don't even think that's in the works. Do you think it is in the works in the near future?
Well, it's already in the works for medical use, and I do believe that marijuana will be the first thing to give. If anything gives, it'll be marijuana. It's the least harmful of the drugs. And we had a caller just prior to you, and his point that there's never been an overdose on marijuana is true.
Yeah. Do you think money comes to play in this?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
That's basically where I'm coming from on this.
It'll lower our taxes then.
I would think so, definitely. The revenue that we would get from taxing and raising our own and taxing would help the federal deficit immensely, billions of dollars.
Our economy must be in bad shape if we have to go out and make some money off, you know, selling dime bags to everybody. You know?
Well,
Money off
the
of
drugs are there.
cigarettes.
The drugs are there. We're not making the money. The mafia's making the money. The big drug dealers are making the money. And
In my experience, too, people who are addicted to more serious drugs like cocaine, typically they will feed their habit by selling marijuana. And so it's a difficult issue, and it's one on which people have scratched their heads for a long time. We're about running out of time. They say we should wrap up. This is a program that's scheduled to run, 2 minutes. It's scheduled to run the last Wednesday of each month, so you can look for it on your schedule, and we'll try and find more volunteers. We're kind of going month by month again, just like we did when we first started out. Again, we appreciate very much the people who have volunteered their time this evening to provide this panel, Lisa Swanson, George DeVoe, and Ron Bender. And those of you who are listening to the show, we're now back, I guess, in commission now that the program was held in abeyance over November and December. And feel free to save your questions up and don't feel hesitant to call. We never ask for the names of callers, and we encourage the anonymity of kind of discussions of potential defendants so that there wouldn't be any possible problems there. And again, this has been the 7th program of the Dial a Lawyer program, and we thank the members of the local bar who have volunteered their time.